Hello, everyone. Um, Today we'll read Hume. David. Today we'll read a. Let me see. I can't even speak. Fuck. Today we'll read An Inquiry Concerning Human Understanding by David Hume, section 5 to 7. Let's see. How do you share screen? Oh. Let me see how you. Let me see. Okay. See. Fucking strange as fuck. I don't know how to share my screen. The fuck? Oh my gosh. It should be just a button. It should be fucking easy. This is fucking dumb. Oh, now I get it. Why it didn't show anything. Okay, now I get it. Now I get it. Maybe now it will show. Maybe not. Huh. Okay. Okay. Now we're live. Okay. Um, Section 5. Skeptical solution of these doubts. The passion for philosophy, like that for religion, involves a certain danger. The passion for philosophy, like that for religion, involves a certain danger. Although it aims to correct our behavior and wipe out our vices, it may, through not being handled properly, end up merely encouraging us to carry on in direction that we are already naturally inclined to. We may set out to achieve philosophical wisdom and firmness, and to become satisfied with the pleasure of the mind, as distinct from those of the body. Yet, reason ourselves out of all virtue as well as all social enjoyment, and ending up with a philosophy which, like that of Epictetus and other Stoics, is only a more refined system of selfishness. While we meditate on the vanity of human life. Oh my gosh, that's a hot quote. While we meditate on the vanity of human life and focus our thoughts on the empty and transitory nature of riches and honors, perhaps we are really just finding excuses for our idleness, trying to get reasons support for our lazy unwillingness to be busy in the world. Let me see. Oh my gosh, it's a sorry about that. Perhaps we are really just finding excuses for our idleness, trying to get reason support for our lazy unwillingness to be busy in the world. Wait, the passion for philosophy like that of our religion involves a certain danger, although it is aims to correct our behavior and well, okay. Um, and focuses our thoughts on the empty and transitory nature of riches and honors. Perhaps we really just finding excuses for our idleness and trying to get reasons support for our lazy unwillingness to busy in the world. However, one kind of philosophy seems to run um where was I? However, one kind of philosophy seems to run little risk of this drawback because it doesn't join forces with any disorderly passion of human mind. Because it doesn't join forces with any disorderly passion of the human mind. Okay. Uh, is he some sort of Descartes? Like, he's against like emotion or something? I thought Hume was someone who cared about emotion. I remember watching a video. He put importance to emotion. This is strange. It doesn't join forces with any disorderly passion. I mean, passion and disorderly passions, I guess, are not the same. Passions of the human mind and can't get mixed up in with any of our natural tendencies or inclination, and that is the skeptical philosophy. The skeptics always talk of doubts and suspending judgment, of the danger of deciding too quickly, of keeping intellectual inquiries within narrow limits, and of giving up all theorizing that isn't in touch with common life and practice. So their philosophy is as opposed as it could be to the mind's idleness, its rash arrogance, its grandiose claims, and its superstitious credulity. Philosophy is opposed to as it could be to the mind's idleness, its rash arrogance, its grandiose claims, and so their philosophy is as opposed as it could be to the mind's idleness. Philosophy is as opposed as it could be to the mind's idleness, its arrogance, its grandiose claims, and its superstitious credulity. This philosophy has a humbling effect on every passion except for the love of truth. Oh my god, that's so beautiful. Such a beautiful line. He's a fucking amazing writer. Um, and that could never be carried too far. This philosophy has a humbling effect on every passion except the love of truth, and that could never be carried too far. I can imagine some scenario where the love for truth can lead to bad outcomes. Um, I mean, yeah, yeah. Like I can imagine a terrorist knowledge for like no, like it's really really he or she or they really really want to know how to create a bomb that they're going to use to blow people up. That sounds horrible. um, um, so I can imagine some counter argument for that, but I don't think that's what he meant there. Given that this philosophy is almost always harmless and innocent, it is surprising that it should be so often be criticized. Given that this philosophy always is almost always harmless and innocent, it is surprising that it should be so often be criticized and stigmatized as libertine, without bound. I think that's what you mean. Profane. Oh, you mean the sexual way, libertine. I think it means like no restriction. I don't know. Um, like immodest, something like that, and irreligious. Perhaps the very feature that makes it so innocent also brings hatred and resentment. Perhaps the very feature that makes it so innocent also brings hatred and resentment against it. It doesn't encourage any bad feelings or habits, so it um, has always, what was I? It doesn't encourage any bad feelings or habits, so it doesn't encourage any It doesn't encourage any bad feelings or habits, or so it has few supporters, but it does oppose many vices and follies, which is why it has so many enemies. When it tries to still limit our inquiries to common life, this philosophy runs no risk of going too far and undermining the reasoning that we use in common life. Undermining the reasons we that we what does it mean? When it tries to limit our inquiries to common life, okay, it does like whatever is, I think, like he doesn't want to be um he doesn't like abstract, like too abstract reasoning. So abstract kind of knowledge. So he's talking about it limits our inquiries, like our investigation to common life, like things we can see. This philosophy runs no risk of going too far and undermining the reasons. So, okay. This philosophy run no risk of going too far and undermining the reasonings that we use in common life. Okay. Pushing its doubts so far as to destroy all action and belief. Nature will always maintain its rights and prevail in the end over any abstract reasoning whatsoever. That is, we shall continue to think and act in the way that our human nature dictates, the ways that are natural to us, with no risk of our being deflected from these by philosophical consideration. That is, we shall continue to think and act in the ways that our human nature dictates. Okay. That is, we shall continue to think and act in the ways that our human nature dictates, the ways that are natural to us, with no risk of our being defle- with no risk of our being deflected from this by philosophical consideration. I'm not sure. I'm not quite sure what he means by this. Like, what does he mean by being? Like being, like I'm a being, or there is no risk of being. Like, um, yeah, reflected from this philosophical. I'm running nose. Fuck. With no risk of our being deflected from this philosophical consideration. For example, I showed in the preceding section that whenever we reason from experience, we take a step that isn't supported by any argument or intellectual consideration. For example, I showed in the preceding section that whenever we reason from experience, we take a step that isn't supported by argument or intellectual consideration, but these experiential gosh, um, with no risk of. For example, I showed in the preceding section that whenever we reason from experience, we take a step that isn't supported by any argument or intellectual consideration. But these experiential reasonings are the basis for almost all the knowledge we have, and there is no chance of their being dislodged by the discovery that they can be justified by argument. So, what does he mean by that? So, but these experiential reasoning are the basis for almost all the knowledge we have. Experiential reasoning are the basis for almost all, and there is no chance of their being dislodged by the discovery of dislodge. What does this mean? I'm not sure. Dislodged by the discovery that. Oh, fuck. How do I mute myself? Uh, Um, dislodge. I need to know the meaning of that. Dislodge. Let me see this. Knock or force out of position. Okay. Dislodged by the discovery that they can be justified by argument. So I think what he's saying is that um, um, so he's saying that sometimes we make some inference from what we see from our experience that isn't actually supported by our intellectual like reason or argument. Like there is no good reasons or argument that that support that inference, but we make it. But the discovery of that this inference that isn't supported by argument is no reasons. It's but this experiential reasoning are the basis for almost all the knowledge we have. So our experience and those inference we make from the experience are the basis for all our knowledge, and there is no chance of their being dislodged by being knocked out. It means knocked out by the discovery that they can be justified by arguments. Like our knowledge of knowing that the inference we are making are not justified. Doesn't mean we get rid of those knowledge. They still exist, even if we cannot justify them. Like we still believe them. But I mean, it's a good belief to have, but we can actually justify them. I think that's what he means. If we aren't led by argument to make inferences, see, if we aren't led by arguments to make inferences from past experience, he was talking about this inference from past experience in previous sections. Oh, excuse me. Like in the previous section, he gave the example that like from our past experience, we know the sun will rise tomorrow, but there's nothing. There's no good reason for me to believe that that's true. The sun may just as well not rise up, uh, and we'll have internal nights. I mean, I mean, who's to say? But it's a inference we make, and I think it's a good inference. I think that's what he's saying. If we're led by arguments to make inference from experience from past experience, we must be led by something else that is just as powerful. So he wants to know what is that other thing that compels us to make those kind of inferences. Some other force that will have power in our lives as long as human nature remains the same. It would be worthwhile to explore what that other force is. Suppose that suppose that a highly intelligent and thoughtful person were suddenly brought into this world. Suppose that a highly intelligent and thoughtful person were suddenly brought into this world, and he would immediately observe one event following another. But that is all he could discover. He wouldn't be able by any reasoning to reach the idea of cause and effect. Yeah, like that is so strange. Like human, when we see something like, let's say, moving, we always automatically assume there's a cause. I mean, that's so strange. Why do we do that? Right? That's very strange. I mean, how do you know that I'm doing it? How do you know something is doing it? And like you can appeal to like nothing happens without cause, but why? Why nothing happens without cause? Why do we need cause? Suppose that a highly intelligent and thoughtful person were suddenly brought into this world. He would immediately observe one event following another, but that is all he could discover. He wouldn't be able to, by any reasoning, to reach the idea of cause and effect, because, firstly, the particular powers by which all natural operations are performed are never perceived never perceived through the senses. And secondly, there is no reason to conclude that one event causes another merely because it precedes it. The idea of cause and effect, because firstly, the particular powers by which all natural operations are performed, power, never perceived through the senses. And secondly, there is no reason to conclude that one event causes another merely because it precedes it. Their occurring together may be arbitrary and casual, with no causal connection between them. In short, until such a person had more experience, he could never reason about any matter of fact or be sure of anything beyond immediately present. What was immediately present to his memory and senses. Until such a person had more experience, he could never reason uh, any matter of fact or be sure of anything beyond what was immediately present to his memory and senses. Now, suppose that our person gains more experience and lives long enough in the world to observe similar objects or events occurring together constantly. Now, suppose that our person gains more experience and lives long enough in the world to observe similar objects or events occurring together constantly. And what conclusion does he draw from the experience? He immediately infer the existence of one object from the appearance of other. Yet all his experience hasn't given him any idea or knowledge of the secret power by which one object precedes another. Uh, re- so what he's saying here, like Hume, believes like everything comes from experience. Every like we cannot have an idea of something without experience. But he's also but the, so he's saying in this case when we like after lots of seeing repeated um, patterns between two objects, we make the inference that one caused another. We actually never like see um, like that the power, the secret power which causes one to cause one like what to cause to one affecting other, like one object affecting another thing, like one cause affecting the other preceding effect. I don't know if that makes sense. Like um yeah, so we never see the secret power, like whatever the secret thing is, like that causes the cause that brings the effect into existence. I think that's what he means. It all uh yet all his experience hasn't given him any idea or knowledge of the secret power by which one object precedes another. Like we are making inference, but we never have the quite we never see the reason behind the experience. We never see it. I mean, there's no justified reasoning behind as to why we're justified making the inference. I think that's what he's saying. Nor can any process of reasoning have led him to draw this inference. Not can a process of reasoning, like argumentation. There is no argument for him to make the reasoning. Like, there is no like premise to draw from the experience that he can use to make reasoning to lead him to conclusion, led him to draw this inference. Yeah. So, but he finds that he can help drawing it, and he won't be swayed from this even if he becomes convinced that there is no intellectual support for the inference. Something else is at work, compelling him to go through with it. It is custom or habit. It is custom and habit. It's a habit and custom. The reason we make inference is because habit. I mean, it's a good question. Does other animals, non-human animals, does it make this inference? I think that would be interesting. Um, it is custom or habit. When we are inclined to behave or think in some way, not because it can be justified by reasoning or some process of understanding, but just because we have behaved. Let me see if anybody can actually hear me. Um, then I'll be. Otherwise, I'm speaking in the void. When we are inclined to behave or think in some way. Okay, you can hear me. When we are inclined to behave or think in some way, not because it can be justified by reasoning or some process of understanding, but just because we have behaved or thought that just because we have behaved or thought like that so often in the past, we always say that this inclination is the effect of custom, tradition. I think habit is a better word here. In using that word, I mean, more accurate, but custom sounds cooler, I think. In using that word, we don't claim to give the basic reason for the inclination. All we are doing is to point out a fundamental feature of human nature. So, making this inference from our experience is a fundamental human nature. I think that's what it's saying. Even though we don't have good reasons to do that, other than that, this is the habit it's just the custom we develop from our experience. In using that word, we don't claim to give the basic reasons for the inclination. All we are doing is to point out a fundamental feature of nature, which everyone agrees is there. All we are doing is to point out a fundamental feature of human. Excuse me. We are doing it to point out a fundamental feature of human nature, which everyone agrees is there, and which is well known by its effects. Which is well known by its effects. I mean, which is well known by its effect, like the effect of making inference. Then, okay, how do you know that is the inference is the one that caused the effect? Isn't maybe I'm thinking too much. Perhaps that is as far as we can go. Perhaps that is we can discover the cause of this cause, and must rest content with it as the deepest we can go in explaining our conclusion from experience. Our ability to go that far should satisfy us. If our faculties won't take us any further, we we oughtn't to complain about this. We ought not. I don't know. How to say. We ought not to complain about this. We do at least have here a very intelligible proposition and perhaps a true one. After the constant conjunction of two objects, heat and flame, for instance, or weight and solidity, sheer habit makes us expect that one when we experience the other. Okay. I mean, I can imagine something solid but very light. But I get what he's trying to say. Share habits, share habits makes us expect the one when we experience the other. Indeed, this hypothesis seems to be the only one that could explain why we draw from 1,000 instances an inference which we can draw from a single one. That is exactly like each. That I think this is the problem of induction. Like that's how inductive reasoning. Like it gives you a probable correlation. It cannot give you causation. You can like there is no way to know what caused something. Sheer habits makes us expect someone. Indeed, this hypothesis seems to be the only one that could explain why we draw from 1,000 instances an inference which we can draw from a single one. That is exactly like each of the 1,000. I mean, it's so strange, right? From 1,000, we can like draw some inference, but from one, but which is part of the 1,000, we can't. Uh, it's strange. What I don't know. It's kind of weird. Indeed, this hypothesis seems to be the only one. Explain why we draw from 1,000 instances and inference which we cannot draw from a single one. That is exactly like each of the 1,000. That is yes. That is what I meant. That so Indeed, this hypothesis seems to be the only one that could explain why we draw from 1,000 instances an inference which we can draw from a single one. That is exactly like each of the other 1,000. Each of the 1,000. So that is what I mean. What he means. So what he's saying is that from let's say there's 1,000 we do experiment of 1,000 like 1,000 things. Well, so I throw a ball and it drops. I do this experiment 1,000 times. From there, me throwing the ball and falling, I can infer that me throwing the ball causes the ball to drop in the ground. But just from the one, we cannot be sure. Like if I'm like imagine I never threw a ball before, and this is my first time throwing a ball. I cannot know whether me throwing the ball will make the ball go down on the ground or go up. I don't know. That is what, but me throwing it once and knowing it and doing it for 1,000 times makes me assured. I cannot be certain that this will always be the case, but gives me the assurance that it is probably true that almost all the time if I throw a ball it will go down on the ground, fall down on the ground, go down. That is what he's saying. Reason isn't like that. The conclusion it draws from considering one circles are the same as it would be formed after surveying all the circles in the universe, but no man having seen only one body move after being pushed by another could infer that every other body will move after similar collision. All inferences from experience, therefore, are effects of custom and not of reasoning. All inferences from experience are therefore effect of customs and not of reasoning. That's a pretty cool quote. All inferences from experience therefore are effects of custom and not of reasoning. Start of a vast footnote. Um, Start of a vast footnote. Writers often distinguish reason from experience, talking these kinds of argumentation to be entirely different from each other. Writers often distinguish reasons from experience, taking these kinds of argumentation to be entirely different from each other. Reasons, arguments are thought to result purely from our intellectual faculties, which establish a principle of science, and philosophy, principles of science and philosophy, by considering a priori the nature of things. A priori the nature of things. What does that even mean? a priori and nature of things. What does this mean? I mean, so, I mean, from what I have read so far, so could it be the case that from experience we draw this inference from there, using our intellect, we can extend our experience somehow, using our faculty of reason to apply it more abstract and more generalized sense. Maybe we should use, I don't know, if which establish principles of science and philosophy by considering a priori the nature of things, examining the effects that must follow from their operation. Arguments from experience are supposed to be derived entirely from senses and observation, through which we learn what has actually resulted from the operation of particular objects, and can infer from this what their result will be in the future. For example, the limitations and restraints of civil government and the legal constitution may be defended either from reasons which, reflecting on the great frailty and corruption of human nature, teaches that no man can safely be trusted with unlimited authority. That's what, like, all the prophet, like Muhammad, like Jesus Christ had. That's what most religious fundamentalist people who wants to establish religion wants: unlimited authority to their leader. Almost. I mean, it's complicated. That is no man. That is no man can safely be trusted with unlimited authority, or from experience and history, which informs us of the enormous abuses that have resulted in every age from an excess of such authority. Um, the same distinction between reason and experience is maintained in all our discussions about the conduct of life. While the experienced statesman, general, physician, or merchant is trusted and followed, the unpracticed novice, however talented he may be, is neglected and despised. Reason can enable one to make plausible estimates of what will be likely to ensue from X type conduct in Y type circumstances. People say, but but they regard reason as not good enough unless it gets help from experience. Only experience that hold can give stability and certainty to the result that are reached by reason from study and reflection. Doesn't Hume doesn't consider reason as some sort of idea, because I don't know. I'm not sure. Does he consider reasons to be like ideas? I mean, like thoughts. He's told thoughts. No thoughts or ideas can come without the direct experience. So I'm not sure. I'll be. I don't think he. I don't think he means reasons itself to be a firm idea. I don't think so. However, although this distinction is universally accepted, both in practical life and in intellectual inquiry, I do not hesitate to say that it is basically mistaken, or at least superficial. Amazing. If we examine one argument like those I have mentioned, which are supposed to involve nothing but reasoning and reflection, they turn out to be relying on some general principle based solely on observation and experience. The only difference between them and the maxims that are commonly thought to come from pure experience is that can be established without some process of thought. What does it mean? The only difference between them and the maxim that are commonly thought to come from pure experience is that that um, I think they can be established without some process of thought and some reflection on what we have observed. In order to sort out its detail and trace its consequences, whereas in two, I don't know what he means by two. In two, the experience event whereas in two, the experience event is exactly like the one we predicted on the new occasion. Whereas in two, the experience event is exactly like the one we predicted in new occasion. The fear that if our monarchs, I don't quite get this part. I mean, it's referring to something before. The fear that if our monarchs were freed from the restraints of laws, they would become tyrants might be arrived at too through our knowledge of the history of Tiberius on uh, uh, Negro. Oh shit! Ah, I mean, it's such a shame that he was a racist. Or um, or one through our experience of fraud or cruelty in private life, or through our experience of fraud and cruelty in private life, which with a little thought we can take um, or through our experience of fraud or cruelty in private life. I probably shouldn't have said that N word. Yeah, my bad. Through our experience of fraud or cruelty in private life, with a little thought we can take as evidence, which with a little thought we can take as evidence of the general corruption of human nature and of the day of danger. I think there's a problem. Like sometimes our experience, like with the scientific method, we know we are not really good at arriving at good conclusion from our experience. I mean, I think sometimes we overvalue science, like scientific research of like psychology and social studies and things like that. But we're not the best. Like there's lots of bias in our faculty of reason. Which with a little thought we can take as evidence of the general corruption of human nature and of danger of putting too much trust in mankind. In each case, the ultimate basis for the fear that we arrive at is experience. Any man, however young and inexperienced, will have been led by his experience to many general truths about human affairs and the conduct of life, but he will be apt to grow wrong in putting them into practice until time and further experience have broadened the scope of these truths and taught him how to apply them. True. Um, Talented though he may be, he will be likely to overlook some apparently minor aspects of a situation which are in fact crucial to the conclusion he ought to draw and to how he ought to act. He must of course have had some experience. When he calls someone an unexperienced reasoner, we mean only that he hasn't had much experience. End of the vast footnote. Yeah, it was vast. It was vast. Let me see. Oh, he ought to act. What was I? I forgot. Okay. Custom. Then it is the great guide of human life. Custom. Then it is the great guide of human life. It alone is what makes our experience useful to us, makes us expect future sequences of events to be like ones that have appeared in the past. Without the influence of custom, we would be entirely ignorant of every matter of fact beyond what is immediately present to the memory and senses. Without the influence of custom, we would be entirely ignorant of every matter of fact beyond what is immediately present to the memory and senses. Without the influence of custom. Okay. So, like, one of the objections of empiricism, I think, is that, I mean, just because like, you climb it stairs, but when you're gonna get down, you don't know that the stairs will hold on. Like, they could just break and you'll fall from whatever height you're on. And he's saying the reason we should trust our past experience is because of our habit, because we have experience of that um, for a, um, from our from our past. Without the influence of custom, we would be entirely ignorant of every matter of fact beyond what is immediately present to the memory and senses. We would never know what means we should adopt in order to reach our ends. We couldn't employ our natural powers to produce any desired effect. There would be an end to all actions and of most theorizing. I should point out, however, that although your inferences from experience carry us beyond our memory and senses, carry us beyond, and assure us of matters of fact that happen in distant places and at remote times, any such inference must start with the fact that it is present to the senses or memory. He's saying again, like, you cannot get any, like, matter of, like, like, without experience you cannot make those inference. You need to first experience those, like, see them. You cannot come to those inferences with abstract reasoning alone. A man who found in a desert country the remains of magnificent buildings would conclude that the country had long before had been civilized inhabitants. What? A man who found in a desert country the remains of magnificent buildings would conclude that the country had long before had civilized inhabitants, but without the initial experience, he could never infer this. He learned the events of bygone ages from history. But to do this, we must read the books and give the information and carry out inferences from one report to another, until finally we arrive at the eyewitness until finally we arrive at the eyewitness and spectators of this distant event. What? And carry out we learn the event of bygone ages from history, but to do this we must read books that give the information and carry out inferences from one report to another, until finally we arrive at the eyewitness and spectators of these distant events. In short, if we didn't start with some fact that is present to the memory or senses, in fact, if we didn't start with some fact that is present to the memory or senses, our reasonings would be merely hypothetical, and however strong the particular links might be. Isn't this? I think this is why, like, Hegelian philosophy or like deontology doesn't go well with like Hume's philosophy, because he doesn't buy like a axiom from hypothetical. Our reasoning would be merely hypothetical, and however strong the particular links might be, the whole chain of inferences would have nothing to support it. So, our reasoning would merely be hypothetical, and however strong the particular links might be, the whole chain of inference would have nothing to support it. We couldn't use it to arrive at knowledge of any real existence. If I ask why you believe any particular matter of fact, uh, that you tell me of, you must tell me some reason. If you ask, if I ask you why you believe any particular matter of fact that you tell me of, you must tell me some reason, and this reason will be some other fact connected with it. But you can't go on like this forever. Eventually, you must end up with some fact that is present to your memory and senses, or else admit that your beliefs has no foundation at all. What we are to conclude from this, something that is far removed from common theories of philosophy, and it is very simple. All beliefs about matter of fact or real existence are derived merely from something that is present to the memory of senses, a customary association. Memory of senses. Does it mean like when we experience something, we put it in our memory, and from there we can use it in the future? Is that what he means? Present in the memory of senses, and the customary association of that with some other things and customary association, like the like inference, that inference we make from our habit. Okay. Or, in other words, having found in many cases that two kinds of objects, flame and heat, snow and cold, have always gone together, and being presented with a new instance of flame or snow, the mind's habit leads it to expect heat or cold and believe that heat and cold exist now and it if will be experienced if one comes closer. This belief is the inevitable result of placing the mind in such circumstances. That our minds should react in that way in those circumstances is unavoidable, as that we should feel love when we receive benefit, or hatred when we are deliberately harmed. These operations of soul are a kind of natural instinct, which no reasoning or processes of the thought and understanding can either produce or prevent. At this point, we could reasonably allow ourselves to stop our philosophical researches. In most questions, we can never make a single step further, and in all questions, we must eventually stop after our most restless and probing inquiries. But still, our curiosity will be pardonable, perhaps commendable, if it carries us on to still further researches and makes us examine more accurately the nature of this belief and of the customary in conjunction from which it is derived. This may bring us to some explanation and analogies that will give satisfaction, at least to those who love the abstract sciences and can enjoy speculation, which, however accurate, may still retain a degree of doubt and uncertainty. As to readers whose tastes are different from that, part two of this section is not addressed to them and can be neglected without harm to their understanding of the rest. How many pages do we have? Oh my gosh. Until 29. 24. 5 page. Nothing is more free than the imagination of man, and though it is confined to the original stock of ideas provided by the external senses, nothing is more free than the imagination of man, and though it is confined to the original stock of ideas provided by the internal and external senses. What's the internal sense? Nothing is more free than the imagination of man, and though it is confined to the original stock of ideas provided by the internal and external senses, it has unlimited power to mix, combine, separate, and divide these ideas in all the varieties of fiction and vision, in every way that can be described or depicted. It can invent a sequence of events with all the appearance of reality, ascribe to them a particular time and place, conceive them as really happening, and depict them to itself with as much detail as it could in any historical event which it believes with the greatest certainty to have really happened. What then is the difference between such fiction and belief? It is not this. There is one special idea that is joined to every proposition, and that we assent to, and not to any that we regard as fiction. There is one special idea that is joined to every proposition we assent to, and not to any that we regard as fiction. The reason why that is a wrong count is that the mind has authority over all its ideas, so that if this one special idea exists, the mind could voluntarily join it to any fiction, and consequently, according to this account, it would be able to believe anything it chooses to believe, and we find by daily experience that it can not. We can, in putting thoughts together, join in the head of not head of a man to the body of a horse, but we cannot choose to believe that such an animal has ever really existed. So what he's saying is that our fiction and our beliefs are like almost the same. But from our daily experience, we know that they are not the same. I don't believe that such an animal ever really existed. It follows that the difference between fiction and beliefs in some sentiment or feeling that goes with belief. It follows that the difference between fiction and belief lies in some sentiment or feeling that goes with belief and not with fiction. What? It follows that the difference between fiction and beliefs lies in some sentiment or feeling that goes with belief and not with fiction. Okay, a feeling that doesn't depend on the will can be commanded at pleasure. That means whenever you need to. It must be caused by nature, like all other sentiments, and must arise from the particular situation that the mind is in at that particular moment. Whenever any object is presented to the memory or to the senses, it is immediately led the imagination by force of a custom. What? Whenever any object is present to the memory or to the senses, it immediately leads to the imagination by force of customs to conceive the object that is usually conjoined to it, and this conception comes from feeling and sentiment that is different from anything accompanying the lost daydreams of imagination. That is all there is to believe, for as there is no matter of fact that we believe so firmly that we can conceive the contrary. There would be no difference between the conception assented to and that which is rejected, if there weren't some feeling or sentiment that distinguishes the one from another. I do not get this section at all. I'll be honest. I do not get it. If I see a billboard, no, billiard ball, my bad. If I see a billiard ball moving towards another on a smooth table, I can easily conceive it to stop on contact. This conception implies no contradiction, but still, it feels very different from the conception by which I represent to myself the collusion followed by passing on of motion, by the passing on of motion from one ball to another. If we try to define this feeling, we might find that hard. We might find that hard, if not impossible to do so, like the difficulty of defining the feeling of cold and passion of anger to someone who never had any experience of this sentiment. Belief is the true and proper name for these feelings. Everyone knows the meaning of that term because everyone has beliefs all the time. Therefore, it is at the very moment conscious of the feeling represented by it. Still, it may be worthwhile to try to describe this sentiment in the hope of explaining it better with help from some analogies. In that spirit, I offer this. Belief is nothing but a more vivid um, and lively. Belief is nothing but a more vivid, lively, and forcible form, steady conception of an object than any that the unaided imagination can ever attain. This variety of terms, five of them, may seem unphilosophical, but it is intended only to express that act of the mind which renders realities, or we take to be realities, more present to us than what we take to be fictions, causing them to weigh more in the thought and giving them a greater influence on the passion and on the imagination. Provided that we agree about the thing, it is needless to dispute about the terms. The imagination has the command over all its ideas and can join and mix and vary them in every possible way. It can conceive fictitious object with all the circumstances of place and time. It can set such fictions in a way before our eyes in their true colors, just as they might have existed. But this faculty of imagination can never by itself produce a belief. I do not get it. What? It can conceive fictitious fiction object with all the circumstances of place and time. It can set fictions in a way before our eyes in their true color just as they might have existed. But this faculty of imagination can never by itself produce a belief. I mean, belief. So he's saying belief and fiction is different because we have a feeling of them being different. Like we feel them different. Like I can imagine myself in the Mount Everest, like I'm like really vividly as if I were there, as real. as I'm like my experience of being here, my experience of like being someplace else where I have where I am right now, let's say. But I feel like there's a, I mean, I don't know. Like so imagine if I imagine me being someplace else, and that actually exists, like that actually happened, and me being someplace else where I never been. Like, I guess I have a feeling. No, no, yeah, I do have a feeling that like there's a difference between those two. I think that's what Hume is saying. That's the difference between belief and fiction. But this faculty of imagination can never by itself produce a belief. And that makes it evident that belief doesn't consist in any special nature or order order of ideas, because the imagination has no limits with respect to those, but rather in the manner of their conception and in their feeling to the mind. I admit that it is impossible to explain perfectly this feeling or manner of conception. We can use words that expresses something near it, as I have been doing, but it we can use. Let me read this part. Okay, but this faculty of imagination can never by itself produce a belief, and that makes it evident that the belief doesn't consist in any special nature or order of ideas, because the imagination has no limits with respect to those, but rather in the manner of their conceptions and in their feelings to the mind. I admit that it is impossible to explain perfectly this feeling or manner of conceptions. It's hard to describe the feeling. We can use words that expresses something near it, as I have been doing, but it is true and proper name, as we observed before, is belief, a term that everyone sufficiently understands in common life. And in philosophy, we can go no further than to assert that. What is the difference? Okay, I should highlight this thing. What is the difference? What does Hume think the difference? When does Hume think the difference between fiction and belief? And think about it. Um, um, and in philosophy, we can go no further than to assert that belief is something felt by the mind that distinguishes the idea from the ideas of the judgment from the imagination on of from the fictions of the imagination. It gives them more weight and influence, makes them appear of greater importance, and strengthen them in mind and make them the governing. I think there is more. I mean, I think there's. No, that's pseudoscience. I don't know. I shouldn't say something like that. Um, um, Makes them appear of greater importance and strengthens them in mind and makes them the governing principle of our action. For example, right now I hear the voice of someone whom I know, sound seeming to come from the next room. This impression of my auditory senses immediately carries my thought to the person in question, to all the objects surrounding him. I depict them to myself as existing right now, with the same qualities and relationship that I formerly knew them to have. These ideas take a firmer hold on my mind than would ideas of something I know to be fictitious. The ideas take a firmer hold on my mind than would ideas of something I know to be fictitious, enchant, such as an enchanted castle. They are very different to the feeling and have a much greater influence of every kind, either to have pleasure or pain, joy or sorrow. Let us then take in the doctrine in its full scope and agree that the sentiment of belief is nothing but a conception that is more intense and steady than conception that are fictions of the imagination, and this manner of conception arises from a customary conjunction of object with some present to the memory of senses. some present to the memory of senses. It's a definition. No. This is a fucking definition. How much do I have? Damn, just kind of like to talk a lot. It will not be hard, I think, to find other operation of the mind analogous to belief on this account of it. And to bring this, it will not be hard, I think, to find other operation of this of the mind analogous to belief on this account of it, and to bring this phenomena under still more general principle. See note on principle on page 2. I have already remarked that nature has established connection among particular ideas, and that nature has established connection among particular ideas, and that no sooner has those, maybe causality is an innate idea. I have already remarked that nature has established connection among particular ideas, and that no sooner has one idea occurred to our thought than it introduces its correlative, i.e., the idea that nature has connected with it, carries our attention towards it by a gentle and imperceptible movement. This natural principle of connection or association come down to three basic ones, namely resemblance, contiguity, nextness, what the fuck? And causation. These three are the only bonds that unites our thoughts together. So namely resemblance, like how adjacent, I think that, like, how similar, I think that's what he means. Resemblance does the same. I don't know what he means. These three are the only bonds that unite our thoughts together and generate that regular sequence of thoughts or talk that takes place among all mankind to a greater or lesser degree. Now a question arises on which the solution of the present difficulty will depend. Does it happen with each of these relations that when an object is presented to the senses or memory, the mind is not only carried to the conception of fuck? The fuck? I'm sorry. I have running nose. I have to clean it. Um, these three are the only bonds that unite our thoughts together and generate that regular sequence of thought or talk that takes place among all mankind to a greater or lesser degree. A lot less. Now a question arises on which the solution of the present difficulty will depend. Does it happen with each of these relations that when an object is presented to the senses or memory, the mind is not only carried to the conception of the correlative? I do not know what you mean by that sentence. I don't get it. When an object is presented to the senses or memory, the mind is not only carried to the conceptions of the correlative, but what the fuck? But comes to have a belief in it. That is, steadier and stronger conception of it than would it would otherwise have been able to attain. This seems to be what happens when beliefs arises from relations of cause and effect. Wait, does it happen with each of these relations that when an object is presented to the senses or memory, the mind is not only carried to the conception of the correlate? What does conception means here? Of correlate, what does correlative means here? But comes to the habit belief in it. Okay, I don't know. I need to know the word. If it is also holds, this seems to be what happens when beliefs arises from the relation of cause and effect. It is also holds for the other two relations or principle of association. There's three principles of association. This will be established as a general law that holds in all operations of the mind. As the first relevant experiment, let us notice that when we see the picture of an absent friend, our idea of him is evidently enlivened by the picture's resemblance to him, and that every feeling that our idea of him produces, whether of joy or sorrow, every feeling that our idea of him produces, whether of joy and sorrow, acquires new force and vigor. This effect is produced by the joint operation of a relation of resemblance and a present impression. If the picture doesn't resemble him, or at least wasn't intended to be him, it doesn't convey our thought to him at all. And when the picture of the person are both absent from us, though the mind may pass from the thought of the one to that of the other, it feels its idea of one person to be weakened rather than strengthened by that transition. We take pleasure in viewing the picture of a friend when it is set before us, but when it is not in our presence, we would infer considering him directly to considering him through a likeness of him that is both distant and dim. I did not get it. I did not get this section. I think I need to read like somebody else's, somebody who understands more than me what he's saying. Okay, let's see. The ceremonies of the Roman Catholic religion. Yes, fuck religion. The ceremonies of the Roman Catholic religion can be considered as instances of this phenomena when the devotees of that superstition are reapproached for the ridiculous. I have a trouble pronouncing words with R. Ridiculous ceremonies it has them perform. They usually plead in their defense that they feel the good effect of those external motions and posture and action, enlivening their devotion and intensifying their fervor, which would decay if it were directed entirely to distant and immaterial objects such as God. We portray the object of our faith, they say, imperceptible pictures and images, and the immediate presence of these pictures makes the objects more present to us than they would be merely through an intellectual view and contemplation. Perceptible objects always have a greater influence on the imagination than anything else does. They say it is perceptible picture images. We portray object or faith, and they say imperceptible pictures and images that the immediate presence of these pictures makes the object more present to us than they could be merely through an intellectual view and contemplation. Perceptible object. So I think what he's saying here is that the symbol like Christ getting crucified. I mean, that's what the fuck. It it would be really hard for religious people to like worship a god who like there is no symbol for him. Like church itself is a symbol for God. Like you cannot just go nowhere just pray, and that's really hard. I mean, Islam has a really strict like no depiction of any god, like no depiction of Allah, but it has lots of symbolism like mosque, like the Quran, the Kaaba, like the black cube itself is a symbol of God. Like it's a house of God. I mean, even Islam worship like some sort of idol, like some sort of object. It also worship object. Like, I mean, it's almost all religion worship some sort of object. They don't like, they cannot just like worship like abstract idea. Like you cannot just go there and just like do like 365 days just pray to like nothing. Like if there is nothing to represent it, you cannot just pray to that. That's really hard. So yeah, I think that's what he's saying. Perceptible objects always have the greater influence on the imagination that anything else does. They usually readily convey. Amazing. Okay, this is pretty good. Perceptible objects always have a greater influence on the imagination. Okay, let me read this part. When the devotees of superstition are reapproached for the ridiculous ceremonies it has them performing, they usually plea in their defense. They feel the good effect of those external motion and posture and action in enlivening their devotion and intensifying their fervor, which would decay if it were not directed. Like, in enlivening their devotion and intensifying their fervor, which would decay if it were directed entirely to distance and immaterial objects such as God. Oh my gosh! Like in Islam, like everybody has to pray to the black cube Kaaba. I mean that is so uh, idol or worship. Like that is idol or worship because it's impossible to do so much work. Like it's just an abstract idea of notion of Allah. That is impossible. I mean, not impossible, but it's really hard for most people. Um, Perceptual objects always have a greater influence on the imagination that anything else does. That always have a greater influence on imagination that anything else does, and they readily convey this influence to the ideas to which they are related and which they resemble. All that I shall infer from these practices and this reasoning is that the effect of resemblance in enlivening ideas is very common. Wait, what? Perceptual objects always have greater influence on the imagination that anything else does, and they readily convey this influence to the ideas to which they are related and which they resemble. All all that I shall infer from these practices and this reasoning is that the effect of resemblance in living ideas is very common, and because in every case a resemblance and the present impression must both be at work, we are supplied with plenty of empirical examples that support the truth of the foregoing principle. We may add force to this example um, by others of a different kind. Where's the footnote? There's supposed to be a footnote. Is it here? I'll read it. Okay, it's there. We may add force to this example by others of a different kind, bringing in the effect of continuity, like nextness, something that is like adjacent, bringing in the effect of continuity as well as resemblance. It is certain that the distance diminishes the force of every idea, and that we get nearer to some object even though our senses don't show it to us. Its influence on the mind comes to be like the influence of an immediate sensory impression. Thinking about an object readily transport the mind to bring that contagious. I don't know how to say it. Contagious. I don't know. Contingent? No, it's not contingent. Contig. I don't know how to say it. I just don't know. To it. But it is only the actual presence of an object that transports the mind of a greater liveliness. When I am a few miles from home, whatever relates to it touches me more nearly than when I am 100 leagues away. Though even at that distance, reflecting on anything in that neighborhood of my friend or family naturally produces an idea of them. But in cases like this, both of the objects of the mind, what is carried from and what is carried to, are ideas, and not to livelier kind of perceptions that we call impression. So they're not experience; they're just idea, one form of idea to another. I think that's what he's saying. Although there is an easy transition between them, that transition alone can give either two of them a liveliness greater than ideas have. And the reason for that is that in these cases, no immediate impression is at work. Huh. Now I can read the footnote. Sarko wrote, Is it just a fact about our nature, or is it just because of some sort of error that we are moved more by seeing places where we have heard that notable people spend time than we are by hearing of their deeds or reading their writings? Indeed, I am moved right now, for I remember Plato, who we are told was the first to hold discussions in this place. And these gardens don't just conjure up his imagination, they seem to place the man himself before me. True. Actually, yeah, it's true. Unless you have some sort of like um, problems with this kind of faculty, I think most people will have the same experience. Then some remarks about the place's association with other people whom the speaker names. Such is the power of suggestion that places have. It is not without reason that memory training is based on this. It is not without reason that memory training is based on this. No one can no one can doubt that the causation has ha, no one can doubt that causation has the same influence as the other two relation resemblance and contigu- contiguity. I don't know. Superstitious people fond of the relics of saints and holy men for the same reason they like to have pictures or images, namely to enliven their devotion and give them a more intimate and strong conception of those exemplary lives that they desire to imitate. Now, it's evident that one of the best relics that a devotee could procure, 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 procure would be something made by a saint. If his clothing and furniture are ever considered in this light, it is because they were once at his disposal, and were moved and affected by him. This led us consider them as imperfect effects of the saint, imperfect because he didn't cause them to exist, but merely caused them to go through various vicis, vicis, what the fuck? While they were in this, while they were in this possession, in his possession. They are connected with him by a shorter chain of consequences than of the things, human testimony, gravestones, written records, etc., by which we learn the reality of his existence. Suppose we encounter the son of a friend of ours who has been long dead or absent. It is evident that this object, this object, the thought, would instantly revive its correlative idea, namely the idea of our friend, and recall to our thoughts all our past intimacies and familiarities with a friend in more lively colors than they would otherwise have appeared to us. This is another phenomenon that seems to prove the above mentioned principle. Notice that in each of these phenomena, the person believes that the correlative objects does or did exist. Without that, the relation could have no effect. Without that, the relation could have no effect. The influence of the picture requires that we believe our frame to have once existed. With the relation, the influence of the picture requires that we believe that our frames to have once existed. This is how fictions are different from um, beliefs. I think the influence of the influence of the picture requires that we believe that our friends have once existed. Being close to home can never stir up our ideas of home unless we believe that a home really exists. Now I assert that this belief, where it reaches beyond the memory or senses, is of a familiar sort and arises from similar causes. So the transition of thought and liveliness of conception that I have just been explaining. When I throw a piece of dry wood into a fire, my mind is immediately carried to the thought of it as making the flame grow, not as extinguishing it. This transition of thought from the cause of the effect doesn't come from reason. Its sole origin is custom and experience. The effect of the cause, I think that would be a better way to write it. This transition from the cause to the effect. Okay, cause to the effect doesn't come from reason. Its sole origin is custom and experience, and as it first begins from an object that is present to the senses. And when I see dry wood go into fire, it makes the idea or conception of flame more strong and lively than it would be in any loose, floating reverie of imagination. The idea of increased flame arises immediately. The thought moves constantly towards it, and conveys to it all the forces of conception that comes from impression present to the senses. It might happen by accident that when a glass of wine is presented to me my next ideas are those of wound and pain, but they will not occur as strongly as they would if I had been presented with a sword leveled at my chest. But what is there is in this whole matter of cause such a strong conception apart from a present object and a customary transition, the idea of another object, which we have been accustomed to conjoin with the former. What the fuck? I hate it when she uses big words. But this is But what is there in this whole matter to cause such a strong conception apart from a present object and a customary transition idea to the idea of another object which we have been accustomed to conjoin the former? I understand until this part. I don't understand. Which we have been accustomed to conjoin with the former. Oh, which we are from our custom we learn to relate. I think that's what he's saying. This is all that our mind does in our inferences concerning matter, a fact, and existence, and it is satisfactory to have found some analogies through which it can be explained. In every case, the transition from a present object gives strength and solidity to the related idea to which transition is made. Here then is a kind of pre-established harmony, Hume's praise, copied from Leibniz, I don't know how to say, between the course of nature and the sequence of our ideas. And though the powers and forces by which nature is governed are wholly unknown to us, we find that our thoughts and conceptions have occurred in an order matching the order of events in other works of nature. This correspondence has been brought about by custom, which is so necessary to the survival of our species and to the regulation of our conduct in every circumstances and occurrences of human life. Is our custom of making that influence from effect is just evolutionary consequences because it happened because of consequences of evolution. But to prove evolution is true, we'll also do the same thing which we can do because which is what we are trying to prove. Okay, I don't know if that make any sense, but yeah. um let's see. Between the course of nature and the sequence of our idea, though the power and forces by which nature is governed are wholly unknown to us, we find that our thoughts and conceptions have occurred in another in an order matching the order of events in the other works of nature. This correspondence has been brought about by. I'm not sure if Hume knew about Charles Darwin. Oh, excuse me. Did Charles Darwin came before him or after him? This correspondence has been brought about by custom, which is so necessary to the survival of our species and to the regulation of our conduct in every circumstance and occurrence of human life. If it hadn't been the case that the presence of an object instantly arose, I don't know, oh my gosh, arouses the idea of object that are commonly conjoined with it, all our knowledge would have been limited to the narrow sphere of our memory and senses, and we would never have been able to suit our means to our ends, or to employ our natural powers in getting food results and avoiding bad ones. Our natural powers in getting food, good, not food, good results and avoiding bad ones. Those who delight in the discovery and contemplation of final causes is purpose, purposiveness. What the fuck? In nature, have here a great deal of admire and wonder at. Here's a point that further confirms the theory I have offered. This operation of mind in which we infer like effects from like here is a point that further confirms the theory I have offered. This operation of mind in which we infer like effects from the like causes and vice versa is so essential to our survival that it probably couldn't have been entrusted to the fallacious deduction of our reason. For the reason is slow in its operation, very little of its appearance appears in early infancy, and at best, even in adults. I mean, true, I guess. It is extremely liable to error and mistakes if it fits better with the ordinary wisdom of nature, such as necessary. An act of the mind should be secured by the instinct or automatic tendency which can be infallible in its operation, present when life and thought first appear, and independent of all the laborious deduction of understanding. As nature has taught us the use of our limbs without giving us knowledge of the muscles and nerves by which they are moved, so she has implanted in us an instinct that carries our thought forward along a course corresponding to the course she has established among external objects. Into the course she has established, though we are ignorant of those powers and forces on which this regular course and successions of object totally depends. Well, that's it. I'll probably stop there because 6 and 7 um my, oh my gosh. Yeah, that's a lot. Yeah. Um Yeah, I'll stop there. I think it's will be more helpful if you read a extra like like some sort of discussion by online discussion of what he actually means, because it's really hard to understand at some points. So yeah, that's it.